This week in biology, we will be talking about the characteristics of living things and organic molecules. This is a great place to start because biology is the study of living things. So what we need to do first is figure out what living things are. It turns out there are 8 things that all living things have in common. Something has to have all 8 characteristics to be considered living. If it fails to meet any one or more of the criteria, it is a non-living thing. The first thing that all living things have in common is that they have a need for materials and energy. When you do this, you are eating and drinking to get the materials you need to be able to produce energy. Plants and fungi can absorb what they need from their environment. The other things living things have in common is that they are able to respond to their environment. An example here would be a plant growing towards the sun. All living things are also made of cells. It could be a single-celled organism like algae or a multicellular organism like you. Living things are also able to grow and develop. They grow and develop. Living things also have a way to reproduce. And this could be that they do sexual or asexual reproduction. But we will talk more about those later in the year. All living things are made from a universal genetic code. What I mean here is DNA. All living things have DNA. Living things are also able to maintain internal balance. Our fancy science word for this is called homeostasis. An example of homeostasis is that you are able to maintain a body temperature of about 98.6, although some of us run a little bit lower than that. The last thing all living things have in common is that they evolve. And that is it for characteristics of living things. Next, we will be moving on to organic molecules. So as we said, all living things are made of cells, but that leads us to the question of what even do cells have in them and what can cells make? First, we will start with an overview about what organic molecules are, and then we will look at these 4 organic molecules in details. here is our overview. There are 4 groups of organic molecules. They are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. When I say organic, that means it is made of 2 or more carbons. Generally, there are some exceptions to that rule, but we will save that for when you take chemistry. The other things you need to know before we start to talk about the organic molecules in detail are 2 super important words that we will continue to use. The first is called a monomer. A monomer is the smallest unit of an organic molecule, which I will abbreviate OM. The second is a polymer. A polymer is simply 2 or more monomers that are put together. So we'll call that a 2+ monomer chain. Monomers are put together to form polymers in a process called polymerization. During polymerization, there is a chemical reaction that joins monomers. So that is all for our overview. We are going to talk about carbohydrates first. I'm sure we all know and love carbohydrates. So we will start there. Carbohydrates are made up of only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And the special thing is that we will find these elements in a 1:2:1 ratio. That means that for every carbon, there are 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. An example of a carbohydrate is glucose. Glucose has the chemical formula C6H12O6. So we can see here we have that 1:2:1 ratio. All carbohydrates will be in that form. The function of carbohydrates, I'm so sorry for the extra board scratches. I'm still learning here. Anyway, carbohydrates are our main source of energy. And we are able to do this process pretty quickly. So we can also call it quick energy. This might be why when you eat something super sugary, you have that sudden burst of energy. It's because our bodies are able to break down carbohydrates and use that glucose relatively quickly. The monomer, or smallest unit of a carbohydrate, is called a monosaccharide. Literally translates to one sugar. You might not be surprised to know then that the polymer, or long chain of monomers, is called a polysaccharide. Another thing that we know about carbohydrates is that they typically end in the letters OSE, like glucose or lactose or fructose. Some examples of things that are carbohydrates are glucose, cellulose. Cellulose is part of the plant cell wall. Chitin. So this chitin is what is found in the insect exoskeleton that makes it, crunchy when you step on it, and it's part of fungi cell walls. So this would be an example of a carb that does not end in OSE, but it is still a carbohydrate. And then glycogen and starch. Both glycogen and starch store glucose. So when our bodies, or if a plant or something has too much glucose, they will be put together in really, really long chains of hundreds or thousands of glucoses to make glycogen or starch, depending on the organism. Next, we will move on to discuss lipids. Lipids are a fancy word for fats. Lipids are also made up of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The difference here is that there is no set number of anything, but that there is generally a lot of hydrogen. Lipids have a variety of functions. They are used to store energy. Lipids are used for waterproofing. And insulation. Some examples of lipids are triglycerides, steroids, cholesterol, estrogen, testosterone, and phospholipids. We will talk a lot more about phospholipids when we talk about the cell wall later. Another special thing about lipids is that they are non-polar. This means that they have no positive or negative charge, so they're not charged. This also means that they cannot be dissolved in water. The last thing for lipids is that they can either be saturated or unsaturated. An example of a saturated fat would be butter or maybe shortening. They will be solid at room temperature. So these would be the types of fats that we generally think are not super great for human consumption. They could also be unsaturated. These would be things like oil and what other fats that will be liquid at room temperature. Next, we will talk about proteins. I promise we're almost done. Proteins are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. They, out of all of the macromolecules, have the most diverse functions. So we will only talk about a few of them. Proteins are important in controlling what goes in and out of cells. So maybe we want lots of glucose coming into our cells. A protein will help glucose get to the inside of the cell. Proteins are also important for controlling muscle movement. To transport materials inside the cell. So maybe we need to move oxygen around. Proteins would be essential for that. They also help with structure, whether that be of the cell as a whole or the parts within a cell. They are important for cell communication. So let's say you are exposed to a bacterial infection. Okay, our cells have a way by using proteins to know that that bacteria should not be in there. And so then they can send out a warning signal to other immune cells to let them know that it's time to fight the bacteria. And with that comes cell recognition. Cells need a way to know that the cells belong to you and are not something that shouldn't be there, like a bacteria or a virus. Next week, we will talk about a special case of proteins called enzymes. So we'll add that to our list, but no, we'll talk about that later. The monomer, or building blocks of proteins, are called amino acids. When there are 20 different amino acids found in humans, and all proteins are made from different lengths and combinations of those 20 amino acids. When we put amino acids together to form a polymer, we get a polypeptide chain. They are called a polypeptide chain because a special type of bond called a peptide bond links the amino acids together. We will talk more about that process when we talk about protein synthesis later in the year. Some quick examples of proteins are lactase. Lactase is the protein that breaks down lactose, which is the sugar found in milk. Insulin, growth hormone, and hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is what helps move oxygen and carbon dioxide around our bodies to get where it needs to go. The last thing we are going to talk about today are nucleic acids. Again, we're only going to do like a short introduction to nucleic acids because we will spend about a week talking about DNA and its properties later. So, all nucleic acids are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. The function of nucleic acids is that it carries / stores. Oh my goodness, I don't know what just happened. Genetic info. The monomer, or smallest unit, is called a nucleotide. Some examples of nucleic acids are DNA, which I hope we already know about, but if not, that's okay, and RNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA is called ribonucleic acid. Quick tidbit about RNA is that it is used as like an intermediate to get from DNA to the protein. But again, we will discuss those later in the year. So I can't wait to see you in class this week so we can spend some more time with this material, and I hope you have a great day.